Hello, and many thanks for joining us. We are live from Brown Robin. Welcome to Brown Robin Nature Reserve. It's a fantastic night here. It is clear. We haven't got any rain, which is good because we are outside under the stars. And yes, this is our first live outside broadcast for Cumbria Wildlife Trust. My name's Pete Jones. I'm a reserves officer for Cumbria Wildlife Trust, and I look after Brown Robin, as well as a bunch of other nature reserves around the south of the county. And joining me today
is Tony Saunders. I'm the Honorary Reserve Manager for Brown Robin.
So Tony is a volunteer for us that is associated with Brown Robin particularly, and he is our kind of eyes and ears on the ground for most of the time. I have a range of nature reserves that I look after, and I can't get around them all that regularly. So we have people like Tony that are attached to a particular reserve, and Tony spends a lot of time out here. So between the two of us, I mean, I've been here 10 years. Tony, you've been here about 15 years, yes. So between the two of us, we've got a lot of experience of the reserve. And so, yeah, tonight really what we want to do is we want to talk a little bit about the nighttime wildlife that we find on the nature reserve, but also that we find across all of the countryside of the UK. I guess a whole lot of wildlife that is nocturnal. And we don't normally see that because we spend our time on these sites during the daytime. But as I say, there is a whole bunch of stuff that comes out at night. What are the kind of things that you suspect that we would see on a night like tonight?
Tonight, it's a nice clear night. It's nice and mild. It's not raining. Anything could pop up really. I mean, we've got some footage to show you later. Some of the animals that come out at night, such as foxes, badgers, deer, and so on. But you also hear a lot of stuff that you don't actually see when you're up here at night. I've spent a lot of time on the reserve in the woodland workshop, making charcoal and camping out, and I've heard all sorts of things out there. So there's all sorts really.
So just as we were setting up just now, we had the bat flying over us, which will be roosting in the trees around here during the day, coming out to feed at night. And we did hear a very distant tawny owl, didn't we? So somewhere off behind us in the trees behind. So there is stuff around. Whether we'll get them on camera or not is another thing. But as I say, we have footage. What we've done. One of the ideas for this was that we would try and get footage of these things, of this wildlife, live tonight. But because of the setup that we've got and the fact that these things are quite unpredictable, we've spent the last week with a bunch of trail cameras out on site getting footage of the wildlife that we see at night. And so we've edited some videos together, which we want to drop in as we're talking about some of this wildlife to kind of demonstrate what we've seen. So, I mean, I think the first thing we'll talk about really is badgers. It's the logo for the Cumbria Wildlife Trust at for the start of things, so it's a good place to start. And it's always a favourite with people. We've got a couple of sets on the reserve, haven't we? We've certainly got a couple of territories. So you have a territory over on the hotel grounds, don't you, Tony?
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the ones down there?
We have an outlying set out there, which is sometimes used, but not very often. And we do get a lot of activity, badger activity out there, digging up the lawns and things like that, digging up some of the woods. And there's also, badgers have latrines. They're very clean animals, in fact, and they have latrines, so they never do their business near their sets. They do it, they dig a little hole and they put it in a hole. Usually also as a boundary marker as well, so my boundary marker territory with their feces. So to let other badgers know this is their territory. And there's a lot of activity around the hotel at the moment. Mainly because of that, feeding a lot to try and fighting up for the winter. But yeah, I'm always coming across badger latrines on here and next door at the Cumbria Grand Hotel.
Yeah, so Tony mentioned that they're very busy at the moment. This time of year in the autumn is sometimes thought to be not such a great time for sort of nighttime wildlife. The middle of the summer is often thought to be the best. But in terms of things like the badgers, they're spending a lot of time at the moment feasting on all sorts of things, spending a lot of time feeding out at night time to try and fatten up before the winter. They don't hibernate, badgers. They kind of go into a sort of torpor state where they just spend a lot more time underground. They don't really come out so much. And they're spending time at the moment really feeding like crazy, trying to build up these sort of fat reserves. You mentioned the sets there, Tony. Tony mentioned that an outlying set we've got down on the hotel grounds down here. So badger sets kind of fall into kind of two categories really. The main set for a badger will have multiple holes in it, and they can be huge. I mean, they can have over 100 meters of within a main set. And they're dug over years and years and years, and the same clan, the same family group of badgers will live in that set for decades sometimes, and it'll get passed down generation to generation. Some of the largest sets can be over 100 years old, they reckon. So you have these main sets where the main clan lives, and then you have these outlier sets that Tony was mentioning, and the outlier sets tend to be much smaller. They can just have perhaps one hole with a short tunnel and a sleeping chamber in it, and they're for the way that the badgers sort of live throughout the year. So most of the time they're in their main sets, working as a clan, as a family group, and then the young males tend to get kicked out of the sets in the springtime when the young are born, and that's because they can possibly sometimes be a bit of a threat to the young ones. So they're kicked out, and these sort of teenage male badgers will go elsewhere, and they'll use these outlier sets for the few months in the summer. So yeah, the family groups in a clan can be anything between 3 and 14 individuals. The sort of middle number of that is about usual sort of 8 or so. But as I say, in the sets at any one time in the year, those numbers can vary depending on who's in the main set and who's in the outliers. What's at this sort of time of year, what are the badgers eating, Tony?
I come across they eat all sorts of things. They're omnivores, so they eat anything from vegetables to meat and roots. I come across this time of year, especially yew-berries.
Yeah.
They tend to eat a lot of yew-berries. They regurgitate the seed up because the seed is poisonous. So yeah, there's a lot of tend to get a lot of yew-berries in the feces, and they also regurgitate some of the tree berries up.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just after 7 o'clock now. It is almost properly dark here at Brown Robin. And at this time of year, because the badgers are spending so long foraging, it is very possible that the badgers are going to be out very shortly. We have video 1 for the badgers, badger 1, Mel. If you want to play that, that just kind of indicates that the badgers were out at 7:30 one of the other nights.
So just wanted to show with this video that the badgers don't necessarily come out very late at night. As you can see on the timestamp of this video, it's only 25 minutes past 7, and the first badger from the Brown Robin set has emerged and is looking around the set. It'll do a bit of an explore of the set and then go out further afield to try and get some food. Here we can see it just. It's been around the set once or twice. It's just spotted the camera, and it's just going to head off into the darkness to go and find some food.
The strength of badgers and the fact that they're able to eat anything, very strong claws, very strong muscles in them. And then I was demonstrating this badger skull here that we've got. Although the back of the skull is missing, this very prominent bone crest on top of the skull is visible, and that's the sagittal crest, and that's where all the jaw muscles are anchored to. So you can see a very, very big surface area for these jaw muscles to anchor to, very, very strong jaw muscles. And the other thing that's unique to badgers is the fact that if I remove my hand here from the jaw stays attached to the skull, unlike most mammals where the jaw is just separate from the skull but held on with tendons and muscles. The jaw of a badger is actually properly hinged, which means that they can get an enormous bite force on that jaw, allowing them to eat all sorts of things and break open all sorts of things to get at food inside as well. And they're ranging across their territories at the moment. A badger territory is about 1.5 kilometres squared on average. And as Tony was saying, we think we have a clan family down on the hotel side of things, and we have a clan over on our nature reserve as well. So other things that we're going to be seeing on a night like tonight, I mentioned the bats that we saw earlier on. Bats sometimes have a bit of a bad reputation, particularly at this time of year with Halloween approaching. The kind of scary bat is one of the things that you'll see motifs of all over the place. But there is very little to be scared about in terms of bats in this country. Mel, if you want to play the bat video, that will give us an indication of the sort of bats that we get around at this time of year.
Our adventure to find bats begins just before sunset on a cold autumnal day in the middle of October. As the sky darkens, we head out to some nearby countryside to see what we can see. The UK has 18 species of bats living here, almost a quarter of our mammal species, and yet many people don't get a chance to experience the wonder of flying bats because they come out in the dark. Usually emerging up to an hour after sunset, it can make finding these fascinating creatures a little tricky. Luckily, we have a neat piece of technology with us that allows us more of a view into the bat's world. We're here on a piece of farmland near my home village in South Cumbria, and we're going to be looking for bats tonight. We're going to be doing that with a bat detector. So the way bats hunt is they use ultrasonic frequencies to ping out, and then the sound bounces back off whatever they are hunting and everything else as well, and it gives them a picture, an image of the world around them. Bats' eyesight isn't very good, and so that is how bats find their way around. Echolocation it's called, so it's the echo of that ultrasonic frequency off objects that they can hear. So we can't hear it because, like it says, ultrasonic is too high for our ears to hear, but with a bat detector like this, you're able to hear them. So what a bat detector does is it has the sound coming into it, it then lowers the frequency of those ultrasonic sounds into something that we can hear. So if we switch it on and put it to the right frequency, we'll be able to hopefully hear if there's any bats around. Okay, so one of the things with bats is that different species of bat echolocate at different frequencies. And so the bat detector has a wheel on here where you are able to alter the frequency that the bat detector is picking up, and by doing that you're able to identify which bats you have in a particular area. So for instance, pipistrelle bats, common pipistrelle bats, which are the most common bat we have in this country, echolocate at 45 kilohertz. So if we put the bat detector at 45 kilohertz and switch it on, we're able to start listening to see if we can hear them. That hissing that you can hear is just the general background noise that the bat detector is picking up. And what we're listening for are particular clicks and noises that are associated with bats. But we can also change the frequency as we go and listen at different frequencies in case there are any different species of bats in the area. So with our bat detector on, there is nothing to do but sit in the quiet of the evening, wait for the daylight to fade and for the bats to emerge. And then, about half an hour after sunset, one appeared. So that is the noise of a common pipistrelle bat hunting. So some people describe it as a sort of wet slap sound, and that noise is when it's identified a moth or an insect that it's wanting to eat by sort of the general echolocation that it's using. It then speeds up those kind of clicks so that it can home in much more precisely on what it's aiming for. And this bat is hunting along this edge of trees here. These are really good places to get bats like this. They like hunting on these woodland edges because they're really good for insects and stuff like that. And so that's what we're hearing. And it's basically just we're seeing it every so often as it's just moving up and down this edge here. And we'll hear it every so often as well. Looks like it's disappeared at the moment. There we go. So that was the noise as it just flew straight overhead. I was able to see it against the sky. It looks a lot darker on this video than it is actually standing here. So I was able to track it across the sky and move the bat detector across as it flew over, and you're really able to hear that sort of noise. We were lucky enough that there was just enough light left to try and get some footage of the bat flying above us. With the bat detector near the camera, we can hear the bat using its echolocation to hunt insects along the edge of the trees. We can clearly see how they hunt here, keeping to the edge of the woodland and flying up and down that edge, occasionally quickly darting to catch an insect on the wing. The quick, raspberry-like sounds that the bat makes every so often is the series of incredibly rapid clicks that it uses to home in on an insect just before it catches it. These rapid clicks give it a much more detailed view of the location of the prey and allow the bat to easily outmaneuver it. with that, it's time to head home. Our evening spent under the autumn sky, looking for these elusive creatures, has shown that there is more than meets the eye when it comes to bats. And if we're able to use our ears too, it opens up a whole new world to us.
So you can see from that video, really remarkable creatures. I mentioned on the video the species that we get in the UK. What species do we get on brown robin toad?
As far as I'm aware, we get pipistrelle, and we also get soprano pipistrelle, because I've been around with a few bat detectors in the past. But we've also had long brown-eared bat next door, but they're probably on the reserve as well. And we did have a rumour that we did have a colony of nocturnal bats, which are quite big bats. But unfortunately, the tree fell down, so we don't know if the colony's still here or not. So it's something we could look into in the future, maybe.
We haven't heard Nacho Bats on here for a long time, have we? Yeah, as I say, we've just this is the bat detector that you saw in the video. I've just been switching this on just briefly to see if we could still get the bat around, but it looks like it's got a little bit dark. The insects that it's feeding on by now have probably hunkered down for the night, so the bat itself has disappeared. Yeah, certainly flying around this area as well. So bats, as I say, Tony mentioned the nocturals in the tree. Bats will roost in buildings, in holes in trees. So we have a small barn on here, cracks in the stonework on this field that we're in are ideal places for them, but also the big tree behind us as well. If you can see that through the darkness, cracks in trees like that are absolutely fantastic for bats. And we have bat boxes as well, don't we, Tony?
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about what a bat box is?
Well, there's two types of bat boxes. You've got the basic one, which is I think it's an all year round bat box, so it's quite insulated. It's a bit like a bird box, but bats come from underneath. And there's also the American flat box, which is what we use next door. And they're basically for summer roosts, and they tend to get just males in there through the summer. They basically get kicked out by the females while they're nurturing the young. And they're very flat, and they sit next to the wall with a little plastic mesh so the bats can climb in, and they sometimes get full. You can have up to 50, 60 bats in one little box, so they're really useful to know that you've got bats on your site. You can get a bat detector and listen to see what bats are in there. And they will mix sometimes. We've had brown long-eared bats in some boxes mixed with pipistrelles. So, yeah.
And bat boxes is something that you can put up in your gardens, on your houses and stuff, to try and encourage them to roost. As I say, they like roosting in big numbers for body warmth, don't they? A lot of them together creates enough body warmth for them to be able to survive colder nights. Unfortunately, bats are one of those species that's seen quite a big decline over the years, and one of the reasons for that is, as I say, some of the roost sites that they no longer have. A lot of buildings, a lot of stonework, which was used by bats, ruined old barns and stuff, are being lost, are being converted, or they're being demolished, and they're losing a lot of their roosting habitat in stonework particularly. And the other reason is, of course, the kind of rather alarming decline in insect species that we're seeing across, well, seemingly the whole world, but certainly across Europe. Massive declines that they're talking about of insects is going to have an effect on a species that uses insects as its only food source, really. So places like brown robin, where we are managing the land for the wildlife, where we have very insect-rich places like the field that we're on at the moment is our hay meadow during the summer, so it's absolutely packed with wildflowers. Really, really good for the insects, and the trees around this place, because we've got woods on all four sides of this field, are absolutely excellent for roosting. So very, very important place for bats. But as I say, you can put out roosting boxes, bat boxes in your gardens to try and help encourage extra roost sites for bats and try and help the numbers recover. So the other thing that we get out here are foxes, isn't it? We see foxes kind of regularly on this nature reserve. You were talking about a family that you had down on Park Field.
Yeah. It was an interesting one. They managed to build a den under a giant boulder, and I went down there one morning on one of my rounds, and we'd had a litter of cubs, and they were actually playing outside the boulder. It was a beautiful sight, actually, because the sun rays were coming through, and they were chasing butterflies around these fox cubs. So that was a really interesting sight. Yeah, I see them on a regular basis nowadays.
Yeah. So I think if we can play Fox 1 now, that's just a kind of general video about the foxes that we have on here.
So this is just a sort of montage of clips of foxes that we captured on the trail cameras as they were out last week. We have a number of foxes on the reserve at Brown Robin. They almost certainly have a den on site, although we're not exactly sure where it is. And the first couple of sightings that we saw of them, they sort of kept out in the back of the woodpile there, further away from the camera, but this one here is obviously very intrigued and is coming a bit closer to investigate what's going on before heading off into the darkness. Now this was an interesting one, very close by. The same fox crosses the camera straight in front of us. I thought that was going to be the only footage from this piece of film, but as we keep looking, the first fox has crossed the camera and the second fox comes through. So there's definitely two foxes here, and that ties into what we had earlier in the season when we definitely had cubs and a mother around seen on site. So that first fox then scooches under the fence here and crosses the field, and then not long behind the second fox comes into view, looks around and crosses under the fence. This footage is just showing that the foxes are quite happy around the badger set. This is the badger set in front of the fox here, in front of the camera, and the foxes are quite happy around the badgers. They don't necessarily compete for the same food, so they're reasonably happy with each other to be in the same space.
On those cameras, on the trail cameras out. The foxes in general live in quite sort of loose family groups. And so what you tend to find is the cubs are born in the spring, and they're born into a den, and the male and female actually spend their time looking after the cubs early on in their life. And once the cubs start to range out and about, they'll go out hunting with the parents, with the male and female, until the autumn. And in the autumn, the cubs tend to start dispersing, but not all of them actually disperse away from family groups. Some of the young actually stay around with the family group and become part of that group of foxes. And they can even be responsible for looking after some of next year's young that aren't even theirs. It's their parents' young, and they're sort of looking after their brothers and sisters in some respect. So that's one of the reasons that I think the second fox that we see there is perhaps one of the young that's still staying around the parents at this time of year. In terms of living alongside badgers, we saw that footage of the fox in front of the badger set. They do live quite happily, or they can live quite happily. In some cases, foxes can actually use abandoned badger sets, can't they? And very rarely, foxes and badgers have been using the same set. I don't think we've ever seen that here, have we? But it has happened before where they're quite happy to live alongside each other. But they do sometimes compete for food. Foxes are omnivores, a bit like badgers, and so they will sometimes compete for the same food, which brings them into conflict with each other sometimes. The other thing that can cause problems between foxes and badgers is that foxes are a predator of young badger cubs. So particularly when the young badger cubs start coming out of the set in sort of June time, female badgers with those cubs can be very, very defensive of foxes and can attack them on sight because they're concerned about the fact that the foxes could take the young badger cubs. So foxes are territorial, much like badgers, and they have reasonably big ranges, but it depends very much on the food source. Urban foxes, where there's plenty of food, plenty of scavenging to be had, can be on territories as big as sort of 25 hectares. But up in the wilds of Scotland, where you've got much, much bigger areas between food sources, they can be up to sort of 4,000 hectares, and foxes will range across these areas across multiple nights. So, yeah, very kind of large range of fox territory sizes. If you want to play the second fox video, Mel, that's just a little interesting aside we caught in terms of the foxes.
So this was some more footage that we got. At first I just thought it was one of the regular foxes, but as we can clearly see here, if we zoom in, this fox has a much, much shorter tail. So whether that's been lost to an injury or a fight or just a bit of disease or something, we're not quite sure, but very, very distinctive fox and very easy to tell apart from the other ones that we see on the cameras.
trail cameras go out. Trail cameras are often used by conservationists like us to try and identify what species are out there, but they can also be used in a finer way as well. In terms of badger stuff, we have a couple of people that are doing a survey for us on another one of our nature reserves with trail cameras, trying to identify the badger groups that are using this reserve, and because of the sort of very good trail cameras that they've got, a little bit better than the ones we've been using, they're actually able to identify individual badgers by markings on them. But with a fox like the one we've just seen with the short-tailed fox, it's very obvious to us to see that this is a different fox than the ones we're seeing. And as Tony, as me were just saying when the video is playing, it's something that we're going to keep an eye out for. This short-tailed fox. It's very, very distinctive. It'd be interesting to see if it's a regular visitor or if it's just a random fox passing through the area on its way to somewhere else. So, alongside all of these things, we get some of the less omnivorous animals and the more herbivorous of the nighttime wildlife. So deer are prevalent on the reserve. We have roe deer on here. Very occasionally in this area we get red deer as well, don't we?
It's not very often.
No, it's kind of rare. So as I say, we're on Brown Robin tonight. For those of you that don't know, Brown Robin is on a hill above the village of Grange over Sands. But where we are now on Topfield is on top of the hill, and it overlooks behind us. If it was daylight, we'd be able to see the whole of the north of Morecambe Bay, if you like, stretching over to Arnside not in the distance, and places like Fowlshaw Moss and Meathop Moss. And Fowlshaw and Meathop are where we get the sort of biggest herds of red deer in the area, aren't they? And occasionally they roam across big areas. Occasionally they come up onto the nature reserve. But it is very rare, and they only stay around the wooded areas. But roe deer are much more common. So roe deer are one of the 6 species of deer that we get in the UK, and they are one of the 2 indigenous species that we get. The other 4 that we get, which include things like sika deer and muntjac, are all deer from foreign countries that have been introduced and have sort of taken on and bred here. But roe deer and red deer are the only 2 species of indigenous deer that we get, and they're massively abundant across the UK. They suffered huge, almost catastrophic declines in previous years, which were reversed by lots of tree planting in the 20th century, and by Victorian reintroductions, where the Victorians would go and reintroduce them into places predominantly for hunting. But that helped strengthen the populations. And then, as I say, tree planting in the 20th century allowed the populations to really boost the area. But they're not all good things for woodlands, are they, Tony? Do you want to explain some of the problems that we have with deer?
Yeah, the problem with the roe deer, if there's too many of them, they can actually change the whole ecology of a woodland by browsing, heavily browsing. So they take damage a lot of trees, and the trees, some of them don't grow properly and even die. And some of the more prolific growers, like sycamore and that, can grow a lot quicker and overshadow the other species of trees in the woodland. So it can actually change the whole ecology. And certainly for coppice woodlands, which we have a small part on Brown Robin, they can actually damage the crop, so to speak. So we do have it fenced off, but occasionally they do cause a lot of damage, even just a small amount of them.
Yeah. So yes, as Tony mentions, we have an area which is fenced off. Deer fencing, which you'll sometimes see on places, is twice the height of normal fencing because deer are able to jump so high. So we have an area here on Brown Robin which is excluded from deer. It's got a very high fence around it, and that's where we have our coppice rotation. And that just allows us to be able to have a coppice rotation and still have deer roaming around the rest of the reserve. But they're not damaging any of the coppice trees that are growing within the coppice rotation. If you want to play the first deer video, we can see some of the deers that we captured on the trail cameras earlier on this week.
This is footage of a roe deer female around the badger set. The camera was set up on the badger set to get images of the badgers, but we knew that we'd also get other stuff around here as well. And this is evidence of that. Roe deer interested in what's going on around the badger set, but not spooked by it enough so that it can come very close up to the camera to eat. There are a number of roe deer on site, and they range across the whole site. We do have an area that is fenced off against the roe deer to try and keep it browsing free, to stop them eating the coppice woodland that we have going on here, but they are free to roam across the rest of the site. As you can see, she spends quite a bit of time around here, around the site, before moving on.
Deer at this time of year, I mean, deer are active all throughout the year. They don't really have any times where they're kind of less active. They need to be eating all the time to keep going. So they are always around. You often see them very early morning if you're on the reserve, or very late in the evening before the sun sets. You often find deer coming out into these kind of open areas. Deer spend most of their time during daylight in the woodlands, but during the early morning and the late evening, as the sun is rising and setting, deer tend to feel braver enough to come out onto more open areas, and so you'll tend to see them out on these areas like Topfield here. So as I say, visible at the moment, but the deer rut for roe deer is between July and August. So that's really when the males are looking for females, and that's when they mate with them. But the females are able to store the embryo before it actually starts developing within them. And so although the actual embryo development in a roe deer is only 5 months, they kind of store it for a few months, which means that the young aren't born until May and June. So that's when most of the young deer kids, as they're called, are around. But as I say, they're very, very elusive. The mothers tend to keep them hidden away. They very rarely come out into open areas. But they're solitary animals. But at this time of year, they will start to form small groups where they sort of gather together more for safety whilst they're grazing. I want to play the second deer video. We'll see from that.
Now, I wasn't sure what had triggered the camera to start filming when I started watching this piece of footage, but it became very evident shortly what had happened. So these are 2 female roe deer out around the badger set. Again, the badger set is just in front of us. You can see the earth pulled out by the badgers there, and the deer just grazing beyond. This is 2:15 in the morning. Very much a kind of nocturnal feeders roe deer, and they're seen here grazing before. One of them spooked slightly because of the arrival of the male. So you can see the male roe deer here with the antlers, the short little antlers, and they'll spend some time grazing on here before moving off to the right.
So there we saw the male of the roe deer on that video alongside the females. We actually have a roe deer skull here, which was found on one of our reserves. You can kind of see the size of these things. Roe deer are not very big animals, no bigger than a metre at the shoulder, really. And the males, even on a fully formed set of antlers like these, they really only have 3 points on them. They're not the kind of red deer which have kind of 14 points, and red deer particularly get more points the older they are. It's always a good way of indicating how old a red deer stag is by how many points the antlers have. With roe deer, they never really get more than 3 points, so you're never really able to tell the age of a roe deer male just from the antlers. But you can see from that these aren't very big deer. And they'll spend their time grazing out on the grasslands, out on places like Topfield here, on brown robin. And then, as Tony said, they're quite they do like saplings, tree saplings, and leaves off trees, so they can they'll be taking those throughout the year in the woodlands. And in terms of the deer that we have on brown robin, we have a kind of moving group of them. Deer never really stay too much in one place for any one time. And over the years, I mean, a good few years before my time, but when you'll have known the place, there were lots and lots of deer here, and they were having a very big impact on the woodland.
Yeah.
And since then, those deer have seemingly moved away. And my predecessor in this role, in fact, my predecessor but one in this role, I remember coming back with him at one stage here a few years ago, and he couldn't believe the difference in the woodland floor, where he said when he knew the site, there was barely any kind of any sort of ground floor at all growing up. The deer would eat most of it because the numbers were so high. But those deers have kind of scattered and moved on. And now we have a huge amount of things like holly growing up, lots of ash saplings, sycamore saplings, which never would have grown up when the deer numbers were bigger. And they do have territories, but they're very loose deer territories. Deer females and males will move in between those territories. Females from one territory will mate with a male of another territory, and vice versa. Yeah, kind of fairly loose in terms of the territories. But as I say, we do always have some here, but probably no more than I would have said about 5 or 6, I think, in total, probably across the whole site. So those are the kind of sort of main species that we kind of really get in any sort of number, and the things that people are likely to see, or the things that people want to see when they're coming out. But that doesn't mean that that's all that we have out here. The trail cameras that we've had when we've had the trail cameras out inevitably pick up other stuff. And so if you want to play the mouse video there, Mel, we'll just kind of an indication.
A wood mouse. It's difficult to tell from this resolution of camera, but they're absolutely everywhere. And good numbers of mice around at this time of year is also really good for things like the owls. So we have tawny owls, and we've been increasingly seeing a barn owl on site as well. So these will hunt across areas of open bits of woodland and fields, preying on small mammals like this mouse.
For that video, you can see that we do get other species on here, plenty of mouse and mice and voles, and they're really good food source for the owls. So we get tawny owls on here, and as I said, we heard tawny owl earlier on today, didn't we? And we often get them calling in the woods. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of the calls of tawny owls, because they're different, aren't they?
Yeah, the tawny owl, it's basically, you all know the twit-to-roo, which is basically tawny owl, and basically, from what I can remember, the twit is the female and the to-roo is the male. And the way I try and remember that is that basically the female is looking for a twit, so twit, to-roo. But there's other owls as well. They've got long-eared owl, which you don't get on brown robin. They sound very different. They're really deep hoot, basically. And we have evidence, or possibly evidence, of a barn owl on site recently. Do you want me to play the audio of the barn owl?
Yeah, I mean, the audio of the barn owl is an interesting one, because it's something that not often people hear. The tawny owl is a much more common one for people to hear. They're very vocal, aren't they?
Well, not everybody is a barn owl. Most people see them flying at night, or even at dusk or dawn. But my experience of the first barn owl I ever saw, or I didn't see it, I heard it actually, was quite terrifying. I was about 7 or 8, and it was thick fog, and it was dark, and this thing flew over my head. I didn't know what it was, and it was screeching like this. So you can imagine, if you've never heard one before and you don't know what it is, this is what they sound like. I don't know if you can catch this or not. So it sounds a bit like a banshee, so it's quite terrifying if you've never heard one before.
So yeah, so always worth listening out for any screaming like that. I mean, there's lots of animals that make screams in the night, isn't there? Foxes are another one that people often associate with sort of screaming sounds, but these things can be barn owls as well. So one of the things that we're trying to do with our trail cameras is to keep them out of a night to see if we can get the barn owl. We're putting them down in areas where the barn owl has been reported to have been seen. We haven't had anything yet, have we?
No,
but they are
just had reports of it hearing it.
Yeah, they are difficult to see, but we shall try doing that. And then one of the other types of animals that we get that people really associate with the night are moths. Unfortunately, at this time of year, it's really starting to drop down in terms of the number of moths. Moths are really a species of the summer. If we'd done this talk in the summer, well, we wouldn't have been starting it until 10 o'clock at night, but it would have been much warmer. We would have been able to talk about moths in more detail. The best way that we kind of assess moths and how moths are kind of observed is via a moth trap. So a moth trap is just a big light source, basically, with a way of catching moths. So it's often a kind of funnel and a box where the moths fall in that. And then in the morning, you can go in and see which species you've got. Really, at this time of year, we're sort of picking up very few moths. One of my friends had a moth trap on recently. He said the other night he actually only collected 8 moths for the whole light. So it really isn't a particularly good season for them at the moment. Although interesting enough, there is a moth called Merville de Jure, which is out at the moment. It feeds its caterpillars feed on oak trees, and that is around at the moment. That's a really pretty moth. If you want to look at those kind of very intricate pattern of green and black and white markings, aren't they? And they're out at the moment.
We did have one last year actually.
Yeah.
Moth traps on site.
Yes, yeah, I would expect them
really
to find them on here.
Really impressive actually.
Very beautiful things. And so kind of really last but not least is just the fact that we've seen a lot of the wildlife that we have here on Brown Robin, but that doesn't mean that you have to come to a nature reserve like this to observe nighttime wildlife. There is all sorts of stuff that you will find in your garden and your local green spaces. So you can do all sorts of things to try and interact with that and trying to get closer to that nature that is at nighttime near you. So with the moths, you don't have to have a moth trap. One thing you can do of a summer evening is to get a bright torch and actually shine it on a white sheet outside. And the moths will fly towards that, bounce off the sheet and land on the floor. And you're able to see what moths you get around an area just from a very simple method like that. Another thing that you can do is use a trail cam. So this is one of the trail cams that we had out on site. These are now getting cheaper and cheaper. I think I picked this one up for about £40. And very simple to use, very easy. And it gets great results. I mean, some of the videos that we've been seeing today were filmed on this, and you can put them out on your garden, and it opens up a whole new world to you that you might not have seen before. If you want to play the garden video now, it's the last video that we've got, I think.
So this is footage of a little baby hedgehog that we found in our garden one evening using the trail camera. This is back in August. It's the same trail camera that we used out on Brown Robin to get a lot of the footage from tonight's talk. We've had it out in our garden and we can show images of the hedgehog, the baby hedgehog, and then this, which is a much larger adult hedgehog. And they are using our garden to live in, to feed in. Our garden is a very wildlife friendly garden, lots of wildflower areas, lots of areas that are not mown, are quite unkempt and look a little unruly, but it's absolutely fantastic for the insects and for all sorts of wildlife, as these hedgehogs show. At the end of the video as well, there is a image of a little mouse as well that we've captured on this trail camera, and we have voles as well. So all sorts of nighttime wildlife that is not too far away from your doorstep right now, probably in your gardens and nearby green spaces, that is only just waiting to be explored.
So you can see all sorts of wildlife in your garden with the trail camera, and if you sit out of an evening in your garden or your local green space, you'll often be able to see things like hedgehogs walking around. The other thing you can do is, of course, feed wildlife in your garden. So things like cat food and dog food can be left out for hedgehogs. You have to be very careful with hedgehogs because they really like cat food, dog food, but it doesn't provide them with enough water, and they can sometimes get a bit dehydrated with that. So it's always a good idea to either mix a bit of water in with your cat food or dog food, or leave a water alongside so that they can drink as they're eating. So that's a really good thing to be able to do, and a good way of encouraging nighttime wildlife to be able to see it. The other thing that you can do is get a bat detector, like we used in the earlier bat video. Again, these things are not particularly expensive, and it's just an excellent way of being able to identify what species of bats you've got around you. But that said, you don't need a bat detector. A lot of the time, if you're sat out of a summer evening, because bats tend to come out about half an hour or so after sunset, there is still enough light to be able to see. So if you're sat out nice and quiet, you can tend to see them going overhead, and yeah, fantastic thing to see. So we're really coming to the end now of the talk, and we want to open it up to questions. So we've got Mel on the computer here who's dealing with the technical side of things. So I think she's going to take some questions from people to ask us, and we're going to answer a few of them.
We have a question from Patrice that said, how soon will hedgehogs hibernate?
Okay, so how soon will hedgehogs hibernate? So hedgehogs are looking at the moment to be hibernating. It is getting colder. If you think about what hedgehogs eat, hedgehogs mostly eat insects and earthworms and things like that. At this time of year, those insects are starting to die down. The earthworms are starting to kind of get a bit further underground. And by the time the first frosts come through, those things will really not be very evident at all. So that's really when hedgehogs are looking to hibernate. And so they'll be looking for dry, warm places, and they'll be perhaps bringing bedding materials in, dry leaves, dead grass, that kind of thing. So very shortly, really, we should start seeing hedgehogs disappear from our gardens as they start to hibernate. But again, it depends on where you are in the country. Down south, they might still have a few more weeks to go. Up in the north of the country and up in Scotland, they may already starting to be getting to hibernate. Another question?
We haven't got any more questions on at the moment. If anyone has any questions, if you can type them into the chat.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, if they want to type them to us, we're happy to answer them. Meanwhile, so we want to thank everybody for coming along tonight, for viewing us. We've had some technical issues, but hopefully it hasn't spoilt the experience too much. We really want to do a few more of these things. It's something that we've done a couple of talks already indoors, streamed live. But I think there really is value to being outside and being able to show people the wildlife that we've got around. Not necessarily always at night, but you know, so I think there is value in that. But it'd be really interesting to see what you guys would want from these sort of things. So it'd be really cool if you could get in touch with us and let us know what sort of things you want to see, what sort of wildlife experiences you want to be able to view, and what you want us to show you on our site. So if you want to do that, you can get in touch with us on Twitter. We're at Cumbria Wildlife. And you can also get in touch with us over Facebook as well. We are Cumbria Wildlife Trust on Facebook. So if you search for us on there, you can interact with us there. Let us know the sort of things that you want to see. Have we got any more questions coming in?
We do. We have a question from Amanda that says, how long has brown robin been a nature reserve?
How long has brown robin been a nature reserve? Well, that's a bit of a
Stages,
tricky question. Yeah. So brown robin, we have acquired brown robin in 3 different stages, really. We got the first part of the nature reserve in the mid-1970s. I think it was 1976, where we got a large part of the southern end of the nature reserve that includes most of the woodlands in that area. Then there was another acquisition in the 1980s, which got us Topfield and the field at the northern end. And then the last acquisition, I think, was in the early 90s. I think it was about 93 or so, wasn't it?
Early to mid-90s.
Early to mid-90s, which was down, there was a small little bit of land around the Blawith Farm complex, which is at the top of the Netherwood Hotel grounds. So it's been a nature reserve, well, some bits of it for you know, a good few decades. And as I say, we've been managing it as a nature reserve since then. So yeah, quite a long time. Any other questions?
We do have one more from Andrea that says, can you recommend a suitable bat detector?
A suitable bat detector. So the bat detectors that we've got, Magenta make bat detectors. They make, as far as I know, 2 different kinds. I think this is the more simple one that just has a wheel to alter the frequency on it. This is the Magenta Bat 4, but they do a more kind of all singing, all dancing one with a sort of digital dial on it and stuff, but that is more expensive. But there are plenty of places online that sell them. If you look at places like Anglian Lepidopterist Supply, sometimes they have them on there, but there is plenty of other places that sell them. But as I say, these are the ones that I use. Any more questions at all? Yeah.
We have a question from Alan, who has asked, where should I place the hibernation box for hedgehogs?
So a hibernation box for hedgehogs really wants to be somewhere where there are hopefully hedgehogs already, and then somewhere sort of out of the way. If you've got a garden or a green space, if you have it somewhere out of the way where you're not repeatedly going up to it, a quiet corner of the garden perhaps is going to be the best place for it. They don't like to be disturbed during their hibernation, so obviously anywhere where you're next to a path or somewhere where you're using a lot in the garden is not going to be ideal. And then really you want somewhere reasonably dry. A lot of the time hedgehogs use things like compost piles and under sheds and stuff is quite a common one, because again these are places where they're not going to be disturbed. So as long as you've got a quiet corner of the garden where you're able to put a hedgehog box, something like that, that will be ideal for them really, and they'll be able to find that, and then they'll start using your garden to get the bedding that they'll use in there to keep it warm, and they'll be bringing that in and using that within no time. Yeah. Right, excellent. So I think we've come to the end of this. So yeah, I want to thank you all again, and from Tony and myself for coming along and watching this. And can I just say from me and Tony, thanks to you, but also to Mel as well. Mel has been on the technical side of things and has been making all of this work, and it's just been a fantastic thing to get this working, and it's been really good. So yeah, big thanks to her for that. Your donations that you've used for this, we've asked for a small donation to watch this talk. They are massively appreciated, and we thank you very much for those. If you want to make donations, I think there's a link on the Demio page that you're on at the moment watching this, which just links through to the donations page on our website. And if you want to further support us and the work we do here at Cumbria Wildlife Trust, looking after the nature and the wildlife in the countryside of Cumbria, you can go onto our website and look at becoming a member of the trust. We're on cumbriawildlifetrust.org.uk, and as I say, any help is much appreciated. So thank you very much.
Thank you.